The Senate chamber was unusually tense that afternoon. The marble floors echoed with each step as Denzel Washington walked slowly but firmly toward the witness podium. The air was thick, not just with formality, but with anticipation. Everyone in the room knew they weren't about to witness an ordinary hearing. Across the room, behind a polished oak desk, Senator John Kennedy leaned back in his chair, a half-smirk curling on his lips as though he had already won a debate that hadn't yet begun. The silence was suffocating. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, zooming in slowly, capturing the sharpness in Denzel's eyes. From the gallery above, citizens watched with a mix of awe and anxiety, some clutching homemade signs, others raising their phones to stream every second of what was clearly going to be a historic moment. The announcer's voice cut through the silence like a knife. This is not just another Senate session, this is America's conscience on trial. Denzel reached the podium, pulled a thick folder of documents from inside his jacket, and placed them on the table with a deliberate thud. The sound reverberated through the chamber like a gavel striking. He adjusted the microphone, his movements calm but deliberate, the weight of the room bowing toward him. Then, locking eyes with Kennedy, he spoke in that unmistakable voice that carried both authority and urgency. "Senator, you claim to represent the people of this nation. But today, I'm here to confront you with the truth the people themselves can no longer ignore. This isn't about politics. This is about justice. And justice," he said, leaning forward as the audience collectively held its breath, "doesn't bend to arrogance." The chamber trembled. Kennedy's smirk faltered for just a second. America was about to witness a clash that would echo far beyond those Senate walls. Kennedy leaned forward, his southern drawl filling the chamber as he tried to seize control of the moment. "Mr. Washington," he said slowly, emphasizing each syllable like a hammer, "you're an actor, not a policymaker. You don't know the weight of governing. You don't carry the burden of responsibility." The words sparked murmurs in the gallery. A few chuckles from Kennedy's supporters floated in the air, but they quickly died as Denzel raised his hand, not in anger, but in sheer command. His calm, steady presence cut through the room more powerfully than any shouted retort could. "Responsibility?" Denzel echoed, his voice dropping low, carrying a rhythm that demanded attention. He picked up the folder and opened it, revealing page after page of reports, testimonies, and photographs. He spread them across the table like a dealer laying down cards in a game where the stakes were life itself. "These are not scripts, Senator. These are lives. Farmers who lost their land because policies favored corporations over communities. Mothers who can't afford healthcare while lobbyists cash their checks. Veterans who fought for this country only to come home and fight their own government for basic dignity." Kennedy shifted in his chair. His smirk returned, but now it was strained, brittle. "So you're going to stand there and lecture the United States Senate? You're going to tell us how to run the greatest nation on earth?" The room bristled. Some senators leaned back, waiting for Denzel to crack. Instead, he straightened his shoulders, his voice rising, measured but fierce. "No, Senator. I'm not here to lecture. I'm here to remind you. This chamber does not belong to you. It does not belong to corporations. It belongs to the American people. And they are tired of watching their futures traded like poker chips." The gallery erupted in applause, despite the gavel slamming for order. Kennedy's eyes flickered, caught between indignation and unease. The battle lines were drawn. Senator Kennedy leaned back, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair as if he owned the chamber itself. His eyes narrowed, and his voice took on that sharp Louisiana bite that had carried him through years of political battles. "Mr. Washington, you think passion equals wisdom. You think stories equal solutions. But this country cannot be run on feelings. It's run on law, order, and leadership. And frankly, you don't have the credentials to even sit at this table." The jab landed like a strike, his supporters nodding vigorously. Cameras zoomed in, eager to capture Denzel's reaction. For a moment, the air hung heavy, as though Kennedy had finally tilted the balance in his favor. But Denzel didn't flinch. He leaned forward, clasping his hands together on the desk, his gaze locked on Kennedy with the calm intensity of a man who knew the power of silence. Then he spoke, slowly, deliberately, like each word was a stone being laid into a foundation. "Credentials," he said, his voice resonant. "Senator, I may not wear your title, but my credentials are written on the faces of the people you swore to serve. I've walked their streets. I've sat in their homes. I've seen their tears when promises made in this very chamber were broken. If credentials mean ignoring suffering for the sake of power, then I'm glad I don't have them." The room erupted in murmurs, half shock, half admiration. Kennedy's smirk faltered. He leaned forward again, trying to seize back the energy. "And what exactly do you propose, Mr. Washington? That we run this government on Hollywood speeches? That we let actors dictate policy to those of us who've dedicated our lives to public service?" Denzel stood. Not in anger, not in theatrics, but with the kind of gravitas that filled the chamber. He held up one of the documents, shaking it slightly for the cameras to catch. "No, Senator. What I propose is that we finally tell the truth. Not the polished speeches. Not the rehearsed talking points. The truth. Because the American people already know it. They're just waiting for someone in this room to admit it." A wave of applause thundered through the gallery, this time impossible to suppress. Kennedy's face reddened as the gavel slammed again, desperate to restore order. But order was gone. Denzel had shifted the ground beneath their feet, the tension in the chamber had reached a boiling point. Senator Kennedy's hands trembled slightly as he snatched the gavel from the desk, slamming it down so hard the echo bounced off the marble walls. His voice cracked, not with weakness, but with fury. "Enough of this grandstanding. You think you can stroll in here, spout your little speeches, and dismantle decades of governance with Hollywood drama? Let me tell you something, Mr. Washington, this isn't a movie set. This is the United States Senate." He leaned across the table, his fingers stabbing the air like a weapon. "And the people didn't elect you. They elected me. They elected us. You don't belong here, and I'll be damned if I let you lecture me on patriotism." The room went silent, the weight of Kennedy's outburst sinking in. His face was flushed, his voice ragged, but in his fury, he had revealed something raw, almost desperate. Cameras caught every bead of sweat, every flicker of insecurity hiding behind his bravado. Denzel, still standing, didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Instead, he lowered the papers in his hand and let them rest gently on the table. Then, with a slow turn toward the packed gallery, he spoke, not to Kennedy, but to the American people watching. "You hear that?" Denzel's tone was calm, steady, almost surgical. He just admitted it. "This chamber isn't about service anymore, it's about ownership. Who belongs? Who doesn't? Who gets to speak? Who has to stay silent? But the truth is simple, this room doesn't belong to senators. It belongs to the people. And no gavel, no title, no wall of tradition can change that." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman in the gallery shouted, "Amen," while others clapped before being shushed by guards. Kennedy's face drained of color. He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. Denzel turned back to him, eyes sharp, words cutting like steel. "You want to know why I'm here, Senator? I'm here because for too long, you've mistaken power for permission. You've mistaken silence for consent. But today the people are speaking. And I'm just their echo." The chamber exploded, applause, cheers, even stomps rattling the floors. Kennedy sank back into his chair, fists clenched, staring down at his notes as if they could shield him. But the verdict was already written in the eyes of the nation. Denzel had landed the blow that would be replayed for years to come. By the time the sun had set on Washington, the footage of Denzel's words had already begun its viral march across every corner of America. Cable news anchors replayed the moment on loop, their voices dripping with either shock or admiration depending on the network's leaning. Fox News called it an actor's overreach into politics, while MSNBC hailed it as a once-in-a-generation takedown of political arrogance. On Twitter, hashtags exploded, hashtag Denzel vs. Kennedy, hashtag Echo of the People, hashtag Who Really Owns America, dominating global trends before midnight. Clips were cut into 15-second reels, posted on TikTok and Instagram, spreading like wildfire among young voters who hadn't watched a single Senate hearing in their lives until now. One viral edit paired Denzel's line, "This room doesn't belong to senators. It belongs to the people," with a booming bass drop, turning a Senate speech into a rallying cry blasted through car speakers and protest marches alike. Late-night comedians couldn't resist. Jimmy Kimmel quipped, "Forget Training Day, this was Kennedy's last day." Stephen Colbert leaned into the drama, replaying Kennedy's outburst side by side with Denzel's calm response, pausing to let the audience roar with laughter every time Kennedy's finger jabbed the air. Memes sprouted overnight, Kennedy photoshopped with steam bursting from his ears, Denzel portrayed as a chess master sliding a king across the board. Meanwhile, outside the digital storm, Real America stirred. College students organized watch parties, pastors quoted the exchange in Sunday sermons, and union leaders printed Denzel's words onto banners for upcoming rallies. Uber drivers and barbershops buzzed with the same conversation. "Did you hear what Denzel said in the Senate? Man, he said what we've all been feeling." Inside Kennedy's camp, panic brewed. Aides scrambled to draft a response, but everything sounded defensive, hollow. The more they tried to downplay it, the more the clip grew, shared with captions like, "They're scared." Kennedy's press team begged him to stay quiet, but the damage had been done. He was no longer controlling the narrative, Denzel was. By dawn, one thing was clear, this wasn't just a Senate confrontation anymore. It had become a cultural moment, etched into America's collective memory. And for Kennedy, the nightmare was only beginning. The morning after the clash, Kennedy walked into the Senate chamber expecting solidarity from his fellow Republicans, but instead he was met with side eyes and hushed whispers. Colleagues who once slapped his back now avoided eye contact, their smiles brittle, their greetings mechanical. The viral clip had made him radioactive, and no one wanted to be caught standing too close. Behind closed doors, donors were furious. A leaked email from a powerful PAC revealed the tone: Kennedy has become a liability. His exchange with Washington has distracted from the agenda and given the opposition their rallying cry. One major contributor even threatened to pull funding if Kennedy didn't repair the damage swiftly. Cable news pundits dissected the fallout with surgical precision. Conservative commentators accused Kennedy of falling into a Hollywood trap, while liberals mocked his inability to match Denzel's composure. The contrast was devastating, Kennedy red-faced and shouting, Denzel calm, precise, unshakable. In politics, optics matter more than facts, and the optics were crushing Kennedy. Back home in Louisiana, constituents flooded town hall meetings. Farmers, teachers, veterans, people Kennedy thought he had in his pocket, stood up and quoted Denzel's words back at him, "This room doesn't belong to senators. It belongs to the people." The sting was unbearable. Denzel's line had slipped out of Senate chambers and become the people's banner, leaving Kennedy with no way to reclaim his footing. Even within his party, cracks widened. Younger Republicans whispered that Kennedy had exposed the old guard's weakness, that Denzel had struck a nerve they all feared, the gap between politicians and the people they claimed to represent. One senator, caught on a hot mic, muttered, "He made us all look like clowns." As the backlash intensified, Kennedy tried to fire back on social media, but every post was ratioed into oblivion. Thousands of replies mocked his attempts, attaching clips of Denzel's takedown with captions like, "Sit down, Senator. The people are talking." His credibility was crumbling in real time. Meanwhile, Denzel remained silent. He didn't need to say anything more, America was speaking for him now. Denzel never intended to become a political figure, yet the roar outside the Capitol told a different story. Crowds gathered beneath banners that bore his words from the Senate chamber: "This room doesn't belong to senators. It belongs to the people." Chants echoed through the streets, "The people. The people." As if Washington himself had sparked a new movement. Journalists camped outside his home, hoping for a statement, but Denzel refused to play into the media circus. Instead, he appeared at a community forum in Atlanta, standing in a modest recreation center, wearing no suit, no entourage, just a simple shirt, a microphone, and a message. His voice carried the same fire it did in the Senate, but here, it was infused with humility. "I am not here to run for office. I am not here to sit in their seats. I am here because America's voice has been hijacked, and it's time we take it back." The room erupted. Mothers clutched their children tighter, veterans saluted, young activists streamed the speech live to millions. Within hours, hashtags like #ThePeopleSpeak and #DenzelForTruth trended nationwide. Politicians bristled at his rising influence. Some tried to dismiss him as a Hollywood liberal, but the narrative didn't stick. This wasn't about celebrity, it was about credibility. Denzel had stood in the lion's den, faced down Senator Kennedy, and emerged as the unflinching embodiment of integrity. That was something no party machine could manufacture. Meanwhile, Kennedy's silence screamed louder than words. As Denzel's rallies swelled across cities, Kennedy hid from cameras, unable to stop the tidal wave he had accidentally unleashed. Allies urged him to pivot, to reclaim the narrative, but it was too late. America was no longer listening to the politicians, they were listening to the man who had spoken truth in their house. As Denzel left the stage that night, an elderly woman grasped his hand and whispered through tears, "They've lied to us for years. But you told the truth." And in that moment, Denzel realized this was no longer about a single clash in the Senate, it was about the soul of the nation itself. The morning after Denzel's fiery speech in Atlanta, the headlines painted a picture of chaos inside the political elite. Washington shaken by actors' words, one outlet screamed, while another sneered, "Denzel Washington, patriot or pretender?" It was clear, his voice had struck a nerve too deep for the establishment to ignore. Behind closed doors, a war council convened. Senator Kennedy, pale and exhausted, sat with advisors who urged an aggressive response. "We can't let him control the narrative. Discredit him, dig into his past, flood the networks with doubt." Their plan was not to debate Denzel but to bury him beneath an avalanche of smear campaigns and strategic leaks. Within days, talk shows buzzed with pundits questioning his motives. Anonymous sources whispered that he had political ambitions, that he was secretly funded, that his Hollywood past made him unfit to speak for real Americans. But every attempt only fueled the fire. Clips of Kennedy's humiliation in the Senate, paired with Denzel's unshakable words, continued to dominate social media feeds. Denzel, aware of the storm gathering, refused to flinch. "They want me quiet because the truth burns their skin," he told a crowd in Detroit. But you can't silence a people once they've found their voice. His calm tone cut sharper than any insult. He didn't raise his finger, didn't shout, he simply stood tall, letting the weight of truth speak for him. Meanwhile, movements sprouted across the country. In small towns and big cities, people organized under the banner of #NoMoreLies, citing Denzel's courage as their spark. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was about reclaiming a democracy long hijacked by money and fear. And yet, as the chants grew louder, so too did the whispers of retaliation. Reports emerged of powerful interests pushing to strip Denzel of platforms, to pressure networks into canceling his appearances, even to silence him through legal intimidation. The establishment was preparing its counterstrike, and America braced for the next chapter in a battle that no longer felt like theater, but history itself unfolding in real time. The pressure mounted like a vice. Every television network carried panels dissecting Denzel's words, yet behind the glossy sets, the establishment sharpened its knives. Think tanks churned out editorials labeling him dangerous, corporate donors whispered about un-American influence, and leaked memos revealed plans to investigate his finances. They wanted to paint him not as a truth-teller, but as a fraud. But the people weren't buying it. In Philadelphia, a rally stretched across 3 city blocks, voices chanting in unison, "We stand with Denzel. We stand with truth." The crowd wasn't made up of activists alone, it was teachers, veterans, parents with children on their shoulders. They weren't following a celebrity, they were rallying around a man who had said what they had long felt in their bones, that power had abandoned them. Inside Washington, the Senate chamber felt different. Whenever Denzel's name was mentioned, unease rippled across the room. Kennedy, once so smug in his authority, now avoided the press, dodging questions about the clash that had ignited a firestorm. His allies whispered about censure, about reclaiming decorum, but the truth was clear: decorum had been the shield of silence, and Denzel had shattered it. Finally, the establishment escalated. A subpoena landed on Denzel's desk, demanding testimony about his influence on public unrest. It was a move designed to corner him, to drag him into their arena and crush him under procedure. The news hit like thunder. Some feared this was the end, that no individual, no matter how strong, could stand against the machine. But when Denzel addressed the press outside the courthouse, his calm defiance turned fear into electricity. "If telling the truth is a crime, then let the record show, I am guilty," he declared, holding up the subpoena as cameras flashed. Gasps rippled through the crowd, the words echoed far beyond that moment, carried by millions watching live. The machine had thrown down its gauntlet. Yet in trying to break him, they had only made him bigger. The showdown was no longer just between Denzel and Kennedy, it was between a single voice and the entire weight of a system built on silence. The day of the hearing arrived like a storm on the horizon. Washington, D.C., was locked down, streets lined with barricades, cameras perched like vultures, and a restless crowd that had traveled from every corner of the nation. Some carried flags, others signs with Denzel's words etched boldly, "This room belongs to the people." Inside the chamber, the air was heavy. Senator Kennedy sat stone-faced, flanked by allies who whispered strategy, but even his eyes betrayed unease. Denzel entered without fanfare, no entourage, no grand gestures. He carried only a folder of notes, his presence alone commanding silence. The chairman read the charges, accusations that Denzel had incited unrest, that his words had endangered order. But when it was his turn to speak, the room shifted. He didn't argue, didn't rant. He simply unfolded a page and began with a steady voice, "Order without justice is not order. It is tyranny." Every word landed like a hammer. He spoke of broken promises, of people silenced, of a democracy drifting into the hands of the few. He reminded them that the Constitution was not written for senators or presidents, it was written for the people in the streets outside, the ones whose lives bore the cost of political games. Cameras zoomed in as Kennedy fidgeted, his mask of control slipping. Then came the moment no one expected. When pressed if he regretted his words in the Senate, Denzel looked directly at Kennedy and answered, "The only regret I would have is silence. Because silence is complicity." Gasps echoed, followed by a rare eruption of applause inside the chamber itself. The verdict wasn't written on paper that day. It was written in the roar outside, in the millions watching live across America. Hashtags surged again, hashtag "We stand with Denzel", hashtag "No more lies", as if a nation had delivered its judgment. When Denzel stepped outside, the crowd parted like an ocean, then erupted in a chant that shook the steps of the Capitol: "Truth! Truth! Truth!" In that sound, the establishment's gavel had lost its power. The real verdict belonged not to the senators, but to the people. And they had spoken. The Senate tried to silence him, but America chose to listen. Denzel's words weren't just spoken, they were etched into history. The question remains, when truth is put on trial, will we stand with silence, or will we stand with the people?